The fog lay thick over Stormford like a damp burial shroud, curling between gaslights and choking the fragile flicker of dusk. Detective Alton Rourke stepped from the rattling train car with the stoic grace of a man who'd stared madness in the eye before, though he didn't yet know how deeply Stormford would expand that gaze. Sheriff Marin met him at the platform, a brittle man of tobacco breath and wary eyes. "3 gone this week alone," he muttered, as he guided Rourke past shuttered storefronts and pale, watching faces. "Vanished near the old Bonfield shack. Locals say it's haunted. Nonsense, of course, but still. Folks won't go near it." Rourke frowned. He'd come on account of the disappearances, skeptical of ghost tales but open to human folly. A detective since the war ended, he'd made a name on clear thinking and colder instincts. Stormford stank of rot and secrets, but he'd crack whatever lay beneath it. It wasn't long before he stood before the shack, sunken into the marsh like a mouth dragged in despair, its roof swallowed by hanging moss. Secluded past twisted vines and sap-slicked trees, it looked more like a memory than a home. Rourke stepped over the broken porch with care. The air felt too cold despite the muggy heat, wrong in a way he couldn't yet name. Inside, decay had claimed most of the furniture. A cot hung half off its frame, and mold climbed in spirals across the warped floorboards. Dust ticked faintly in beams of dying light from the one unboarded window. Then, something caught his attention. Bone fragments, faintly luminescent under a film of rust-orange moss, circled in a pattern too deliberate to be natural. He knelt beside them. Symbols, etched in the floor beneath the rot, writhed with an uncomfortable asymmetry. Geometry that made his head throb, simply trying to follow the angles. Behind him, wood creaked, not under his footsteps. Rourke rose slowly. A gust of fetid air, fragrant with mushrooms and grave dirt, swept the room. Shadows gathered where light should fall. A whisper, just at the edge of speech, brushed past his ear before dissolving into the marsh's distant insect drone. That night, Rourke lodged in the town's only inn, back aching from a day spent tracing footprints that vanished in the mud beneath the shack. He sorted the photographs he'd taken, faded portraits nailed to rotting walls. One of a young woman with sorrowful eyes holding hands with a man in an archaic lab coat. No names. Outside, fog clawed the window like needful fingers. Then, again, the whisper, but clearer this time, like breath through broken teeth. He never came back. Rourke turned, heartbeat like a war drum. Nothing, just his reflection in the misted glass. Yet he noted something new pinned beside the exit. A rusted key, dull in color but sharp in presence. Beneath it, burned into the wood, the shape of a triangle twisted upon itself, a geometry that defied familiarity. The key glinted once, faintly pulsing. Stormford, he realized, breathed secrets, and something in the swamp was breathing back. A sickly perfume of rotting wood and sun-warmed moss clung to Detective Alton Rourke's coat as he emerged from the shack. The air pressed heavy, a suffocating stillness stitched with insect tremors. He paused, pulse drumming behind his eyes. Something had changed. It wasn't merely the silence. There was a presence now, clinging to his thoughts like mildew. Inside, he had found more than dust and decay. Nestled beneath a loose floorboard was a faded letter, the ink scrawled in frantic strokes. It was addressed to someone named Eleanor, from a man named Dr. Jasper Tillinghast. Rourke read it twice. Beneath declarations of love and pleas for secrecy, one sentence shrieked out, Meet me where the stars curve like spores in a godless bloom. Bring the key. A gust of wind rattled the shanty's frame. Rourke turned and saw it. No shadow warned of its arrival. No sound betrayed motion. The figure stood just beyond the laurel thicket. Tall, vaguely human, draped in what looked like veils of white fungal filaments. Its face, if it had one, was a warning writ in spore clouds shifting like breath. Where its eyes should be, glowed bulbous sacs pulsing to some silent rhythm. Then it vanished. Rourke staggered, fumbling for his revolver, but the air around him yielded only swamp silence. Sweat stung his eyes. The encounter had left behind a residue. He could feel it in his lungs, as if something alive had seated itself within. That night, the dreams began. He wandered in cyclopean halls fashioned from bioluminescent mycelium, their walls unnaturally curved, host to symbols that melted recollection with their utterance. The geometry there did not obey Euclid, didn't obey reason. Above him loomed an expanse not of stars, but spores, suspended in a vacuumless dread. And always Eleanor's voice, whispering a name he couldn't pronounce. In the waking hours, the visions bled through. Light twisted unnaturally at the edges of his sight. Reflections in stagnant pools hinted at twin moons and stairwells descending endlessly into fungal catacombs. He returned to the shack and searched feverishly. Beneath the rusted bed frame, inside a cedar box wrapped in waxy cloth, he found it. A key, cool and obscene in its craftsmanship. Unlike any key he'd seen, each tooth formed from etched angles that gave vertigo when stared at too long. It seemed to hum slightly when held near damp earth. Next to it, a photograph. A young woman, Eleanor, he guessed, sitting beside a man whose features blurred at the edges. Tillinghast? Behind them bloomed gargantuan mushrooms forming a gate-like arch that Rourke had glimpsed only in dream. He pocketed the key. Standing alone in the lifeless swamp, Rourke understood one thing. The haunting was no longer limited to the shack. He carried it now, rooted somewhere in his spirit. The ghosts here didn't merely linger. They grew. A page from Tillinghast's journal, torn and stained, clung to the underside of the box. It read, "If the spores claim you, let the geometry guide. The lock feeds on memory. The key opens what should never breathe." Stormford's marshes answered only with stillness as Rourke turned toward the town. Beneath his feet, the soil sighed. Whatever he had found, it was only beginning. Rain hadn't ceased since the last vision, torrents beating the shack's rotten roof like a death knell. Alton Rourke sat hunched over the ruined desk inside the decrepit swamp dwelling, the scientist's burned journal spread open before him. Much of it was indecipherable. Pages brittle with mold, ink bled into patterns that mocked language. But amid the smears, he traced one sketch repeated over and over, a spiral of angles that shouldn't exist, a two-dimensional impossibility casting three-dimensional shadows. He didn't sleep anymore. To close his eyes meant plunging headlong into nightmares, where fungal shapes whispered in no tongue he knew, and structures loomed with rotating spires not bound to logic. Stormford, once distant and cold to him, now pulsed with metaphysical sickness. The scientist, Dr. Felland Myris, they now called him in passing, had loved her. Marianne Akeley, the innkeeper's eldest daughter. Rourke remembered glimpses, a locket found beneath the floor, with her photograph pressed beside a sprig of desiccated mycelium. The townsfolk pretended not to remember, but he knew the truth. The ghost wasn't just residual horror. It was longing. Myrus's fragmented entries detailed a hypothesis that certain spores could bridge the threshold between life and death, anchored by emotion, catalyzed by loss. Using his knowledge of radical biology and ancient geometry, he built a key fashioned from minerals mined near the Stormford crypt. Not for entry, no, for preservation, for breaking some dimensional veil. Rourke held it now, iron cool and humming dimly when touched by light. One phrase repeated, "The key aligns the soul's aperture, where the dead seek permanence." He clenched his jaw as another tremor rattled his vision. The room warped, angles unfolding and reknitting, walls dripping inward like wax. A bloom of fungus erupted silently across the floorboards, puffing spores into the stagnant air. Rourke staggered back from the desk, coughing violently. He could hear the ghost again, not in voice but in feeling. A yearning, a pull. His mind reeled under geometrical truths it wasn't made to comprehend. He stumbled outside, knees sinking into the wet peat clogging the shack's threshold. Thunder howled, and from the depth of swamp mist, the phantom took shape, dripping, bioluminescent. Her form less woman now than memory incarnate, grown soft with decay and light, 1,000 mycelial threads holding together her semblance. She whispered directly into Rourke's thoughts. "He tried to bring me back, but some doors open both ways." Rourke held out the key, trembling. In that moment he saw everything, not just the lovers' pact, not just their rupture through this mortal skin, but what lay underneath the swamp itself, the geometry, a spiraling chamber older than memory, echoing the same impossible shapes he saw in dreams. It waited for him. It always had. He fell to his knees. He understood what he had to do. The geometry was not just madness. It was invitation. The wind howled low through the moss-slicked trees as Detective Alton Rourke stood before the weathered stone door in the heart of the Stormford swamp. The crypt key, a twisting length of green-black metal etched with inhuman grooves, pulsed faintly in his hand. He could hear the call again, wet, whispering, intimate. The voice of the woman lost to the fungal spiral of death and longing, her sorrow still alive beneath the soil. The underground chamber opened with a shriek of grinding stone. Stale air flooded upward, the odor of rot and bitter mycelium. Rourke stepped inside, lantern gripped tight, casting flickering light upon walls carved in the impossible angles he'd encountered only in dreams. The geometry twisted the eye, made the head throb. It was not meant for sane minds. At the center of the crypt loomed an altar of bone-white fungus pulsating gently, as if breathing. Embedded within was the final journal page of the outcast scientist, her last words to the woman she'd loved. "We open doors not just of life and death, but of time and memory. Through the spores, we live again, but never whole, never at peace." Rourke understood now. Their love, forbidden in the old world's eyes, had sought immortality in the new, through science, through alien life. Their pact had gone awry, birthing the fungal ghost who haunted the swamp shack, reliving love's final hour in endless decay. The ghost's form appeared before him, glimmering with spores, her face tattered with rot and regret. Yet her eyes, they were all too human. As Rourke approached the altar with the crypt key, she reached toward him, not with malice, but longing. "You can end it," she whispered, voice like wind in reeds. Rourke's hand trembled. He could flee, leave the horrors buried, the ghost to haunt her cursed loop forever. Or he could finish it, seal the crypt, forever bind the fungal plague and its echoes of love misused. But there would be a cost. He inserted the key. Pain shrieked through the geometry. The fungus screamed in shapes and heat. The ghost began to dissolve, releasing a final sob as her essence was drawn downward into darkness. With each second, Rourke felt himself unraveling, piece by piece, memory, name, self. As the door slammed shut behind him, a silence bloomed. Above, Stormford stirred. The air lightened. Children played again at the edge of the marsh. The haunted shack collapsed into moldering timber. In weeks, none would speak of disappearances. In months, none would remember Alton Rourke. In a sunken chamber beneath the swamp, illuminated only by phosphorescent mold, a lonely figure sat cross-legged before a still altar. His eyes watched nothing. His mind echoed geometry. There are no heroes in Stormford, only keepers of dreadful secrets, and ghosts made of love and ruin.